Session one happened last week. If you missed it, I do have some notes and also have the video recording for that. I am recording this session as well, so just letting you know. And this is cloud part in the domain 3 of the security architecture and engineering. And I'm hoping it'll be around 60 minutes to 45. I mean, 60 minutes to about 70 to 80 minutes. Um, so we'll see how it goes. So I want to do a quick recap um, before we proceed. In case you missed the last session, or if you were present but you fell asleep, regardless, this will kind of help us with what we're going to see today. So we'll do a quick recap, and then we'll explore some of the cloud threats and vulnerabilities. So a little bit about me. I passed my CISSP in August of 2020, which was last month. I'm here to assist this Discord community. I am not in any other community. I'm on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me, please post on Discord, and I will be happy to be your connection. And you can PM me with any questions anytime. Of course, I'm in the US, so my time zone, is Central Standard Time, so I may not respond fast enough for you because depending on where you are. However, I do go through my messages and I try to respond as and when I can. So again, I want to tell everybody congratulations because if you are here, I mentioned this in the last time that you are already a CISSP, and most people will tell you when you write the exam, have the mindset of a CISSP. But if you are like me, I figured why not have the CISSP mindset as you're studying, so that'll help you to better understand the concepts or how much concepts you need to understand and how are you going to apply those in the exam. So it will kind of help you with that. So have the mindset both when you are studying for CISSP as well as writing your practice tests and of course the exam. So a quick recap. Let me find my notes from previous discussion, just in case I need to go through it. So we defined cloud computing, and it was the NIST definition. I don't have it here, but it was a definition from the NIST publication 800, I believe 800-24, something like that. But you can refer to my notes. But what that definition did was gave us the foundation for defining the 5 characteristics of cloud, which was being on demand, available on demand, having a broad network access, and resource pooling. I mentioned the multi-tenant model. And then I talked about rapid elasticity, which you can think about it as scaling up or scaling down. Scaling up means like adding more memory, more resources, and scaling down means taking away those resources, but also scaling inward and scaling outward, which basically means multiplying those virtual machines as per your demand. That was just an example with regard to like virtual machines, adding more virtual machines and also being able to remove those virtual machines. That would be scaling inward. So those were like the characteristics. And there was one more. It was the measured service, which helps us to measure our performance and obviously help us optimize the service. And this can be done automatically or it could be done manually. Mostly it will be automated because it's cloud services and you want it to be automated. You don't want to be getting calls or emails saying that your server has just run capacity. So you want it to be automated. So anyway, so we'll also discuss the three modes of deployment. Does anybody know what are the three modes of deployment? Just to quickly recap. Anybody?
SAS, ES, PAS.
Yes. So yes, PaaS and SaaS. And then four models of delivery, which is the public cloud, private cloud, and then I had talked about community cloud and hybrid cloud, and there was a lot of confusion with these. So make sure your concepts are really clear on what these are, and try to come up with an example for each. And so that way you can remember that for the exam, as well as being able to differentiate between them. And then we briefly discussed the shared responsibility model and what this was. In case you had an on-premise system, all of the responsibility is on your shoulders and the people that you have hired. I'm saying, like if it was your company, it would be your responsibility. However, when you go into the cloud, now you are opening up to others who you don't know, you don't have any control of in the hiring process. You don't have any control on their training process, their certification process, or whatever. So there comes this concept of shared responsibility, and every cloud service provider should have a shared responsibility matrix or a model that tells you what their responsibility, or let's say where your responsibility starts and where it ends, and where the cloud service provider's responsibility starts and ends. So this way, nobody's pointing fingers at each other, but are able to provide the right kind of service when needed. So we discussed that very briefly. So going into threats and vulnerabilities, and I don't want to make this like a risk and the domain one discussion, but you have to understand what a threat is, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys do now. Most of you are familiar with. So it is anything that it has the potential to cause harm, and cause harm to an asset. And by the way, asset can be tangible, non-tangible. It could be a computer, it could be a person. So keep that in mind. Vulnerability is a weakness, maybe in your information system or system security procedures. That can also be a vulnerability. Internal controls can also be a vulnerability, or it could anything that can be exploited or used by that threat to cause harm is a vulnerability. So it's a weakness of the system. Risk here defined. I'm using these unicorns because I've seen a lot of people or a lot of documentation or books use like an X. X for me means multiplication, or like in mathematics, but it is not really a multiplication function. So I just used unicorn because magic can happen between the T and the V, which is your threat and the vulnerability. And so if you look at PMP, project management certification, and if you go through their standards on how risk is calculated, it may be a little different. And then when you go into like cybersecurity, it may be a little different. So it really depends on how you come up with that risk. But what is important to understand is that the threat exploits that vulnerability. And so your formula is between, it's to do with the threat and the vulnerability. And of course, don't forget the asset value. Um, there is a concept of total risk. I thought just to put this out there because not I know most people understand it, but you may not pay attention, and then in the exam you may get a question where you have to add that asset value to your calculation to actually come up with the total risk. So something to keep in mind. All right. I'm actually sitting outside and we have a wind blowing at like 11 miles per hour or something like that. I didn't really thought it would happen today, but so all my stuff is flying. There goes my notes. I'm just kidding. All right. So let me go to the next slide. So what common threats and vulnerabilities should you study for CISSP? Okay. So you can come up with your own list, and I'm sure a lot of people have a list that you're following. But if you're not, then where do you go, right? Like, what do you study? There's like 30 plus. There was somebody on Discord who posted like a screenshot of about 40 plus threats and vulnerabilities. Should you know all of them? I would say yes, if you are interested in understanding everything. So, how do you decide which ones are the ones that you need to know for the exam? It's really hard to say, right? I cannot tell you for sure that, hey, study this and don't study that, but it's good to have an understanding of all of it. However, there is one thing you could do, and I'm pretty sure this is what ISS Square also does. If you just go and Google top 10 clouds, 10 cloud threats and vulnerabilities, and if you go through that search result, I think that will help you, right? Those are the top that are considered by the industry. But if you notice, when I was typing, you saw report as another keyword. So if you do a report and if you do like 2019, you will get these reports by these other security companies. If I want, just let's pick up this, no, not that one. Let's go, I guess, Oracle. So you'll see these threat reports, and in their threat reports, they would describe the top 10 or top 8 or whatever, depending upon how much they consider, cloud as their core business. They may have more threats that they may show you, but um, they will list all of the different vulnerabilities. Okay, so this is a good way to kind of know about the top 10, and I would just focus on those because for the exam you need to understand, you need to learn the top, or not learn but know or understand the top 10 vulnerabilities. I say top 10, maybe top 15, but if you are able to define, describe and explain these like to your spouse or your partner or something, that's all is enough for your CISSP. Don't go too deep into how these attacks and these threats are engineered. All right, so what I'm going to do today is I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to just take like one of them, like say data breaches, and then just look at an example, a real world example, and then discuss the second one, insufficient identity, credential, and access management a little bit, but not show you an example, right? So if I do all that, it might take us a couple of hours to go through this. So if that's okay with you guys. But if you have any particular question on certain ones, then we can always come back to it and discuss on Discord or wherever. I mean, on just chat. But if that's okay, now, are you guys familiar with data breaches? Anybody that can think of the world's biggest data breach or an example?
There are a lot happening, but nothing in the back of their mind. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. So I think for me, the biggest one that I can think of is the Yahoo data breach that happened in 2013, 2014. And I believe though that is still the number one largest data breach just because of the number of accounts that were breached. And so that's one that comes to my mind. And so this data breach, so what is data breach, right? So data breach it's a security incident. It is also a security event, but it's an incident because there was a negative impact. So in which information was accessed without authorization. So that's one of the key differences between like data breach and maybe account hijacking, where in account hijacking somebody is able to gain your credentials, whereas here they are getting access to the sensitive information. Like in example would be PII, personally identifiable information, PHI, which is your health, personal health information, passwords, your bank account, credit cards. In your country or region, there may be like a social security number for every citizen. That would be considered sensitive and is considered sensitive. And if somebody gets hold of that, is a data breach. So we'll go look. Actually, let's go to the next slide. So here, I thought this was a really cool photo because you may have seen this, in the internet, where there's a bike without wheels. So if you think about this as a cloud service provider, and here's a cloud service provider who is really cautious about security. They did tie the bicycle to the pole, but then they didn't secure the data. And so, without data, they can't really run their business. And so they're kind of stuck. And in today's world, if you have a data breach, it is not just the loss that came from, people suing you. If you have to be GDPR compliant, then you also get fined. Um, you know, so very, very, it's become more important than ever. And so I thought this was a really cool thing to kind of see. So I was talking to you about Yahoo breaches. What happened in the Yahoo breach? A data breach was, discovered by Yahoo. They say in September they discovered it. That in 2014 they were the victim of the data breach, and in this case the company believes, I don't know if that was proven or not, that it was a site or state-sponsored actor. What that means is it was not done by a group of small hackers. It was state-sponsored. So that's another something you need to really understand is state-sponsored actors have a lot of funding and a lot of protection. And so they're able to do a lot more advanced type of hacking and attacks. And in this particular case for Yahoo, does anybody know what was the main attack vector, or what was used, how they got the credentials? So
Hey, sorry to cut you in
yeah,
between
go
here.
ahead.
When you say state-sponsored, right, is it something like the government is sponsoring for that country, or is it something from outside? That's what Yahoo's telling.
Yeah,
How
so
do you define that?
it's a very good question. So when I think about state-sponsored, is that it is by some big organization, but then it is a government of a certain country, or it could be that it is by in the same country. If there were two different parties and they're trying to get into each other's information, uh, they're turning against each other, and there's going to be a civil war. It could be in the same region. I mean, that's how, I mean, I don't like to limit myself and say it's only a foreign country trying to attack, or trying to get hold of information. It could be anybody, but it's state sponsored, which means there is like some sort of protection for these people, false identities, or identities that that they can use when they are in public, and then they're kind of they have all these other resources. And so state sponsored usually means it's a big, massive, organized crime, right? So State-sponsored, yeah, that's what it means. And in this case, Yahoo
Yeah.
basically said that, hey, this was done, and I believe, um, I don't want to name any country, but I believe one of the countries did this to get hold of information on the government employees. And basically everybody had a, or has, or I don't know if they have it anymore, had a Yahoo account at one point in their lives. Or back in the days, Yahoo was very popular, so that would be the one to get information from if you wanted information about anybody in the world, right? So it was kind of like, now Google, how Google is today, most people have a Google account or a Facebook account. So that's how they saw that particular information is being valuable. So, and so I just like did like what, why, and how for this particular one, so that when you read a question, it's probably good to kind of go through what happened when you're reading the question, right? It'll say something happened. You can kind of get that information from that, and then why did it happen? Sometimes that why that you think could be the answer that you need to pick, or could be the options that's provided to you. So it'll be kind of good to go through these questions in this what, why, and how. Not necessarily, because I know you can't really apply this to all of the questions, but I kind of did this for this presentation at least, so that you get into that mindset. So what happened here was a data breach, which is intentional or unintentional release of secure information. Why did it happen? Because somebody wanted somebody's personally identifiable information, or they may wanted to do some, steal money or compromise identities, and or the biggest the biggest thing that nowadays is people trying to sell stuff, somebody else's stuff on on dark web. And so that's the big deal, right? So people, if you can get hold of a massive collection of credit cards and you are able to sell it on dark web, you can make a lot of money. Now, again, how much successful they are, all that depends on you know what kind of methods were used, and how fast the attack was identified, and how what did the company do, and so on and so forth. But even today, that's very lucrative. So even though this is back in 2014, it is still the number one top most attacks on the cloud infrastructure. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that list. So we had insufficient identity, credential, and access management. So the industry standard considers these to be like the most common threats, right? I don't want to go too much detail into that, but if you just want to understand what that means, it is basically that a weak password was used, for insufficient identity or credential. It could also mean that, like I think it was a Marriott. I may be wrong. There was another incident. I'm maybe mixing two different things, but there was one where a company bought another company, right? They merged their businesses, but they didn't really pay attention to the security practices. And so in doing so, they took on all the vulnerabilities of the other cloud system. And so that can happen. So that you have to be diligent. And all of these, most of these attacks are to do with due diligence. When the due diligence was not followed, which due diligent is, you can define it in many different ways, but being following the right practices, being like for code of, for ISC squared, there is canons, right? So diligence, being due diligent, like I am checking my firewall logs. I mean, at least minimum, you have to do your checks on your and audits on your uh, access, your logs. And if you're not doing that, you're not being due diligent. So that's the failure of those is what causes most of these breaches, and even today. But anyway, so that's the insufficient identity and credential and access management. Somebody on the Discord wanted me to cover this insecure interface and APIs. So I have a slide on that. So what is an API, right? So um, before we go there, let me see here. I have it. I want to give you an example. Okay, so this way you understand, because I'm not going to go detail into uh, what kind of APIs exist, because there is REST APIs, there are APIs, and I'm not a cloud expert where I don't really do cloud programming or programming between software in the cloud. API is not just in the cloud. It could be on-premise as well. It could be between two different softwares that are running on-premise. Okay, so it's basically a programming interface that you can use to maybe access data that's stored in another system. So if you had a SQL server and you had another, let's say, another database type, um, and you wanted to basically use information on SQL database and pull the data into this other database. Let's call it, I don't know, MySQL. So Microsoft SQL and MySQL. So there is a API that you can use to query and get that data. Now, usually in systems that are like internal and behind firewalls, most of the time people don't really think about security in terms of authentication, and they may keep these systems open. So it's really easy to just send a query and get a response back. It's all internal, so hey, not a big deal. But when you go into the cloud, such systems need to be locked down. And you will hear more and more in the news that, like Instagram and Facebook, and Google, their interfaces are being locked down. Before in 2005, you could go into Facebook and get, data about somebody. Today, it's hard. It's difficult because now they've locked it down. And why did they do that? Obviously, because of all the cloud attacks they had, or so this particular the attack type, insecure interface and APIs, talks about how these programmers and developers thought about security, and they developed these insecure API interfaces without any um, security or authentication. And so what that does is basically it gives the attacker the ability to get data, whatever data they need, and then mass download it and query unlimited times. And so those are all the vulnerabilities of this APIs. Now, if you lock down the API, which means you can limit how many queries you can have on a certain API. Instead of saying unlimited, if you lock it down to, let's say, 5,000, and if you get a 5,000, then you can block that IP, or that originating source IP or whatever. You will actually stop the threat from going from downloading millions of records, right? So you're limiting now to only 5,000 queries. So things like that are really important when these cloud service providers, I say cloud service providers, but like these applications in the cloud are being designed. So these are what they're more focusing now. So what do you need to know for CISSP? Just understand that these APIs, they're all over the place. They're all around you. Your phone uses them. Facebook, Instagram, Google. They have built so many different APIs. If you think about COVID-19, I think it's the John Hopkins University or organization that has these APIs that you can go query and see how many cases are in a certain country, right? And if you think about it, they are not locked down, I think, but they do have some limitation on how many queries you can make. But it's free, it's useful. And these are really helping everybody. But then at the same time, you want to make sure that you are locking them down. So here's an example. May 2019, last year, Instagram admitted a security bug in its developer API which allowed hackers to obtain the email addresses and phone numbers of 6 million Instagram accounts. Now, one thing to remember or to understand about this attack is that these, out of the 6 million Instagram accounts, there were a lot, I guess majority of them were high profile accounts. High profile accounts are like of that of politician, celebrity, um, somebody that's kind of famous, popular. And imagine their phone numbers being out in the web or the dark web, and somebody is able to use those. Now, what can you do with those? I mean, I don't know. It's like basically you can use it to, they may be using it to do like other attacks, using the phone numbers. They may be able to um, call them or do like banking, where they're able to spoof that they're calling from a certain bank, and then maybe get hold of their banking information. I don't know. So, but that was what was the big deal about this. And Instagram, after so many months, they did limit their API calls. And when I say limit their API calls, they had unlimited calls on their APIs. I think they were able to lock it down and to limit that request. And what happened in this case was that their interfaces were left open with weak passwords or no passwords. The APIs did not limit the number of queries to the data in the cloud database. And so, that's and basically they got why did they do it? They got the private email addresses and phone numbers of high profile accounts. And how did they do it? That was because they exploited the system vulnerability, weak password, and so on. So let's see what was next in the line. System vulnerabilities. And a little bit about system vulnerabilities. You probably are familiar with this, got bored of looking at it. It is basically anything that is lacking or a weakness, right? It's a weakness of a system, but it could be, I'm trying to think of an example. So if let's say you have a web page where you are able to enter your username and password. Let's say there is no validation. You know what validation is, right? So validation is when you say that user ID should be 1 to 16 characters and not more than that. So if their user ID is just limited, and also let's say their password is limited, then nobody can put more than that many characters, and it wouldn't affect the system behind or the back interface of that website, the back end of that website. However, if there was no validation, and if let's say an attacker could exploit that vulnerability where there is no limitation, he could put extra characters or codes and gain access to information that he's not supposed to be seeing. And I think I'm describing something like SQL injection, something like that, but system vulnerabilities can be that. It can also be where um, the oh, somebody says I had a typo in my previous. I spelled security wrong somewhere.
Yeah, it was sorry. It was at the bottom. I just thought I'd catch you. It was like 2 slides back, I think.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
pal. No
I
problem, man.
no problem. I actually didn't get any chance to proofread this because I
No, it's
was
okay.
yeah, I just did that
It
like
was within the
on the
last five
fly.
minutes or so.
Yeah, I did it on the
Yeah, no,
fly a
you're doing
couple of
great.
hours ago. So thank you for
Okay, good
noticing, though.
deal.
I will up. I went before I put this on my website. I will go through it and kind of proofread it. But
Okay.
thank you, though.
Is
So
everyone here studying for CISSP?
what is that?
Is everyone here studying for CISSP, I imagine?
Mostly, yes.
Good,
That's the hope. Everybody is studying.
good. Awesome.
Yeah. How
Good
about
deal.
you?
Yeah, I am. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
cool.
Good. Yeah. So I mean, it's So the thing about this cloud is that it's kind of vast and wide open. So when I was studying for it, I didn't really know how much to study, how little to study, and but what I found out like towards the end was that you could just study the top 10 vulnerabilities and just kind of get familiar with that. And that's my advice to everybody. Get familiar with what these are. If you're able to, when you read it, if you're able to understand what they are, I think that's more than enough for you to be able to answer those questions. Again, don't go really deep and detailed into those. So um, let's see, what was our next topic? So we were at insecure interface and APIs. I'm just going to kind of go fast through these others. System vulnerabilities we just talked about a little bit. Account hijacking, and a good example would be like phishing. So somebody does phishing online and are able to get hold of your credentials. So account hijacking, think about it. Think about credentials, your username and passwords. That would be account hijacking. And in the cloud service provider's point of view, it would be somebody that gets hold of the cloud service provider's admin accounts. What happened with Twitter recently, about a month ago. So that would be a great example for account hijacking. And they did use phishing attack on Twitter employees to gain those account credentials. Malicious insiders can be employees, right? So they're all already inside, but they're malicious, right? So any employee that accidentally did something is not a malicious employee. So you can think about somebody who has this um, intention to cause harm. So that is malicious insider. And so that's the biggest threat, right? I mean, we as humans are, we call it, these are the weakest link, um, meaning we are hard to train, we are hard to predict. Of course, artificial intelligence is kind of changing that, but still, we are kind of difficult to understand. And so, when you are hiring somebody, you want to do a lot of these background checks and have, you know, security checks in place, so um, these malicious insiders, if they are in your organization, are not able to attack or not able to cause harm. And separation of duties is, there's so many different ways you can do it. Again, we're not discussing all the details about these threats. I'm just going through these so that way you know what the different threats mean. Advanced persistent threats, APTs. I think I have a slide here because I thought this is something that would be good to understand. So APTs are nothing but, you could think about those as state sponsored. They are basically a group of attackers that try to steal data or disrupt operations, destroy infrastructures. When I say destroy infrastructures, I mean they are they can actually create fire, cause a system to fail, uh, and, and things like that. And how do they do that? That's why the word advanced, right? So they're using some of the latest techniques in hacking. They're not the small, you know, um, folks who are doing phishing attacks. These are using some latest techniques. They have funded, they have funds, or they've been funded by somebody that provides them with loads of resources, and um, they use multiple methods, tools, and techniques because of that. They will do brute force attacks. Um, the second word, persistent, means they are, when you're persistent, you to write CISSP exam and pass, you will pass the CISSP exam. So they are targeted. They are persistent. They are sitting in your network uh, for a long time before they actually plan and attack. So they have long-term access to whatever target machine or target network they have. They're dormant also because they go unnoticed for a long time, and they can come back and attack over and over again. So that's the characteristic of APTs. And of course, what are the threats? The threat could be anything, but here I thought this was a really cool slide. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if I can zoom it more or so.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, also that in advanced persistent threat,
Uh-huh.
they are not like trying to attack to a random target.
Uh-huh.
They define who specifically they will target and use all the resources they have to get what they want.
Yes.
So I think this is a good slide because that's actually the first step
Yes,
of that type of attack.
that is true, and that's a good point. So they're not there to just fish, try to put a fishing rod and catch one or two fishes. They are there, like you said, they're targeting. They know what is at stake. They have done research, and they may been doing research before even they start targeting. And some of the organized things that goes on nowadays, I believe, they are like a they're like a company. I mean, they have like market research. They try to see what will be their next target, even before they have finished with the one they are, so that they may be able to leverage what they're doing now with the next target. I mean, they are advanced. Okay, so that's a really good point. So they define their target, and then they organize, which means they may hire more people, or they may already have somebody that they have hired, or they may get more groups together, and the groups may not even know that they're working for this one APT. So it's a really very complex operation. And they will, like here it says, they will build tools, or they will acquire them. They will build their own tools. So there is no, they don't, they have software development processes in place. They will create new tools if they want to. Research target infrastructure, like we said, they may target an employee in the beginning to get hold of certain network credentials, and then get in. And once they're in, they are trying to do more discovery. They do like a lot of discovery, and it goes on. They'll slowly test the waters, right? They will not release or unleash what they're about to do. They're not going to do that. They're going to try one little thing at a time and see how people react to it. Um, some of the examples that I can kind of think of is like in like industrial control systems. They're not going to blow um, that's a reactor. Reactor is like a chemical reaction system. They will not blow that out, but they will try to fail some of the protections around the reactor. And so in doing so, they're trying to understand how people will react. Because if they try to fail something, and if there is a system in place to protect that equipment from failing, they're not going to be able to use that for their final, whatever they're planning to do. And so they will test in small quantities. Of course, they will exfiltrate data, which means they will get the data out. They may encrypt that data, so you don't even know what's going out of your system. They may convert the data to look like it's something very usual. They may find when your backups are being conducted, and they may use that particular time slot to actually exfiltrate data, which is get the data out. So they do all of that, and so that's why they are advanced. They're like a class of hackers that are called APTs, and governments track these people, and they're always on the lookout for them, and that's pretty much about it. I mean, I think I may have an example here. I'm from Industrial Control System, ICS, and so the Stuxnet was a worm that was used in this um, Iran's nuclear program. And by the way, it was delivered using a USB device. And this worm, basically went hopping from one computer to the other in the network. And it was specifically designed to target the control systems of the nuclear facility. So they had inside information, kind of, where they knew exactly what system was being used, and so their whole plan was to disrupt the nuclear program. Back in the days, 2008, 2009, all of this nuclear program deal, and it's still going on, the fight and everything, but there were people trying to break that program for Iran. And so anyway, so here attackers, their objectives, they pursued it for over months or years. Of course, if you go search online for this Stuxnet, if you're curious, people already know which countries were involved.
Hey,
Yeah, go ahead.
Cyber, the only page I'm seeing is the data breaches one. I'm on a cell phone, so
Oh,
is there
okay.
anything that you're sharing?
Is that only him, or is everybody else able to see my APT slide?
Yeah, I'm seeing your APT slide.
Okay, so you may want to refresh your screen. Maybe you want to get in and out, maybe. Sometimes that'll help.
Yeah, I'll try that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So what happened here was they were in the system, this APT attack, and they basically changed defenses, or actually, hold on, I was a little lost there. So they were sitting inside so that's what happened. And then why did they do that? They were trying to steal data, disrupt operations. In this case, disrupt operations would be a good reason, and destroy the infrastructure. Basically, they were trying to kill these centrifuges inside the nuclear facility. And you can search online for details if you're interested. And of course, how did they do that? System vulnerabilities, that was one of our um, threats for cloud. They did use that. Now, I know people are thinking, hey, this is a bad example, right, for cloud, because this was in a nuclear facility. And you're right, this is not a really good example. You probably find better examples out there, but I thought this was kind of easy to understand. So if you go look up this online, it's easy to understand how they did it, even though it was in Iran's data center. But it doesn't really matter, right, where your data center is. Uh, it being in cloud, obviously it's even more easier to do, and you wouldn't put a nuclear operation, in a data center on the cloud, anyways. Hopefully, people won't do that, but anyways. So how did they do it? They did the penetration using the USB. They got in. They deployed a malware, a worm, and they expanded. They move laterally, so that they are not noticed by anybody. And so once they move laterally, they find a system which is vulnerable, and then they move up and down, and then they cause damage. So that was about the APT. So we should keep moving on. We're almost at the end of this hour. And let's see what else I have got on my list here. Data loss. You probably know what data loss is, right? So, if you are using your phone, and if you lost your phone, you have a big data loss if you didn't back it up to the cloud. But what if you have a phone, it's working fine, and one day you open your phone, and then you realize you don't have any data on your phone, which is that you used to use. Maybe your photos are gone that you had backed up on the cloud, or your contact numbers are gone. Something small like that can really be a problem for somebody like, somebody that's an average phone user. So you can imagine that data loss is a big deal. And it is also, by the way, called as data leakage. And that's because sometimes data can leak like water, and it can leak from one. So in cloud, there may be some misconfigured networks or interfaces, and another tenant might have access to your data, and they may actually steal it. Somebody may have that somebody may do it on purpose. How would they do it on purpose? There's all this, hey, free cloud trial, right? Hey, sign up for this free cloud trial. These attackers can take advantage of that and get into the system, find what it's running and what are the vulnerabilities in the system, and then they can move literally, and get into legitimate accounts that are being used in that data center or the service provider, and get hold of your data. So think about data loss as something like that. So the data loss is any process or event that results in data being corrupted, deleted, or made unreadable, let's say by a software or an application. So what if their application has an issue, and it's reading all this data, but then it's corrupting it at the same time. When it's writing back, it's doing something goofy, and so that would be considered data loss. And basically it's accidental. Think about accidental deletion of data, overwriting the data, or some malicious action that results in data, same thing, data deletion, corruption, or maybe even encryption. Somebody would just come in there and encrypt all your data for you. The data is lost if you don't have the decryption keys. So moving on, we are almost at the insufficient due diligence. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go to denial of service because we are kind of running out of time. But again, go through all of those if you get a chance. There are plenty of resources online. Earlier, I had showed you like just do a search for top 10, and then just go through them and see if you can describe them. If you cannot describe them, go and read more about it and understand what it is. So let's just hop into.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
For example, thinking about the shared responsibilities.
Yes.
When a company is using is moving some applications or is using some resources from the cloud, there are some cases that the company needs to be in charge of doing the software updates in case there's like a software vulnerability that the software needs to be updated. And I don't know, maybe I don't know if that it goes into number 9, maybe, that people sometimes forgot that they need to take care of software that is, for example, in an EAS or a PAS, they need to they have the responsibility to update their systems because it's not the cloud service provider responsibility to do that.
Right. So like you say, hey, we put all of our thing in the cloud. Now the cloud service provider is responsible for it, and we are just gonna not worry about it. And yes, you're right. That kind of attitude, like with doing something, moving from on-premise to cloud, and not really continuing your responsibility of maintaining those systems. If it was for like a pass, you're still responsible for your application because you are using the platform provided by the service provider. But you're right, you are not doing the due diligence of keeping those the software patched. And so, yes, that would be one example. And I think I had if you want, we can just quickly look what example I had. So this was, oh, this is actually was a good one. So um, if you heard about the Starwood uh, acquisition by Marriott Hotel, this is a good example of that. Marriott did not, so this was an acquisition, and they did not do their due diligence on Starwood and how the Starwood's security operations were, or what kind of security they had in place for the data of their customers. And so, like, this is a little different. It's not related to systems, but they were not, they didn't have any kind of encryption. I don't know exactly what happened here. Again, there's not a lot of information about this, but about 49 million records were affected. I mean, that's a huge amount of information. What happened was the Marriott acquired Starwood, and there was, I believe, like an APT, advanced persistent threat. Now, basically, now got into Marriott's systems because they integrated those, and so you have a data breach. But they also say that, like, if you like, some articles will tell you that this was done to get information about the U.S. government officials, because a lot of government agencies would use Marriott to put their officers, for to stay, and so they were trying to get that information, and so it may have been a state sponsored. Um, Anyways, but that's a good example, and thanks for bringing back us to this one. But again, um, I know we're kind of running out of time, but but I would look up this particular one. It's very interesting if you're interested. All right, so let's go to DOS, or denial of service attack, and you've probably heard this greatly. It's very common type of threat, and most people understand it. It's because it's very popular. Like, you can talk to somebody who's not in security, and they'll probably be able to tell you what a DDoS is. I mean, I don't know, but I believe it's very common. So what is DOS and what is DDoS? A DDoS is distributed denial of service, and DOS is basically, distributed denial. I'm sorry, denial of service, and DOS is basically, using multiple sources. And there are multiple ways to conduct a DDoS, and you just need to know what are the different types. Again, don't go too much detail into it. I've highlighted a few here because I've seen questions with those: IP spoofing attack, buffer overflow attack, SYN flooding attack. Of course, there are others too, like the Smurf attack, the teardrop attack, and there's king of death attack. But the reason why I have the ones that are in bold is because I've seen those in, like, either practice tests, but then I may have seen one or two in my own exam. So just letting you know, just kind of read up on it. Um, the ones that are not in bold here, those are like, for example, the ping of death attack and the teardrop attack. They no longer happen on cloud because they've already taken care of it, kind of. Because if you see uh, how they happen, you will realize that they were basically using a vulnerability in the TCP communications, where you could send a certain type of IP address and spoof it. So there is a lot of protections in place now. So those things are not possible anymore. Again, if there are some older systems out there, they could be still vulnerable to these types of attacks. But majority of the cloud service providers, they've all kind of protected. Again, I would not just say that and keep quiet. I would still research. If it was your organization, you are, due diligence. Do your due diligence and make sure you don't have a system that's vulnerable to these. But what are these? Let's just go through them quickly. Denial of service, right? So DDoS. And all of this notes, by the way, I will share it so you have it. For some reason, my PowerPoint did not save the changes I did. I must have done something when I saved it. But anyway, so I had this particular screenshot, which the source of this screenshot is also in under the references. So if you want to go and see where I got this information from, but I thought this was really neat. So what IP spoofing attack is when attacker spoofs the IP address of another legitimate computer, or it may be something that is an invalid IP address. Regardless, what he does is he spoofs the IP address, and then he sends it to the server, and the server basically starts responding to this IP address. So in this case, if you notice, he is um, sending this TCP packet, or sorry, IP packet, and he has forged another legitimate IP address. In this case, it's 210.21.15, and he's sending it to the server. So anyway, so the server is getting really busy trying to respond. And now imagine if this was distributed, meaning there were multiple systems doing the same thing. This server would just get bogged down and will be busy with all its resources dedicated to that one particular type of response. So that's IP spoofing attack. What is Smurf attack? So in Smurf attack, it uses the ICMP echo request. So if you do ping, if you're trying to see if this system is online, you just use a ping service. So that's ICMP, right? You know it's the Internet Control Messaging Protocol. Again, if you're not familiar with that, go ahead and look at that. But what you need to know for this particular attack is that the Smurf attack is basically very similar. The attacker sends, I don't know if you can see me, I wish I could zoom in. Okay, so the attacker sends, through the internet, through the router, sends a ping request to the server, which is called a victim here on the left. Okay, and basically he's trying to target that victim. And how is he doing it? He is using these little bitty computers, and all of these are now sending requests back to the victim's computer. And the reason being, the way he programmed this is he put the IP source as the victim's IP address. So if you look at the IP source, 210.21.1.5, it's not the attacker's IP address, it is the victim's IP address. And he has made that packet, and then he sent it to these computers. And these computers think that it's the victim's computer that is actually wanting the response, and they send the response back to the victim. If it was just one ping request, ICMP, it's not a big deal. But if it gets from hundreds and thousands of these systems, then that server, the victim is basically busy. And that's how they're able to conduct the denial of service for that particular case. And so that is that. That's the Smurf attack. Teardrop attack, that's another one you need to be familiar with. Again, this is no longer valid, these attacks, because how the teardrop attack works is it creates IP address fragments or IP packet fragments and puts them in the header of the TCP packet. And these fragments that come from the source to destination, at the destination, these fragments have to be put together in order to see what this packet has, right? So imagine these packets are gibberish, and basically the attacker will send a multiple number of these packets, and the destination server is busy trying to put this back together. It's like a puzzle piece, thrown at you at a rapid speed, and rapid amount of, a large amount of puzzle pieces are thrown at you, and you're busy trying to put these together when you should be really doing other things. And so that's how they get the server real busy. And that doesn't happen anymore because now there are a lot of security checks in place to drop these packets. And so that way, this attack is out of the question. SYN flood attack. If you're familiar with how the handshake happens, right? The three-way handshake, you should be familiar with that. I would definitely look into that again if you're not familiar with it. So you send a SYN packet to the server, and the server acknowledges that SYN packet with a SYN ACK, and then you send an ACK back, right, to the server. That's the general way of doing it. What if, like in this case, the hacker sends a SYN pack, and instead of getting this SYN ACK back, you send more SYNs to the server, and you just keep doing that. You keep the server real busy with SYN packages, because in a normal scenario, once you send a SYN, you wait for the SYN ACK. But what if the attacker just keeps bombarding the server with SYN packages, right? So like here it says, the SYN flooding occurs when the attacker sends a huge number of packets to the server but does not complete the process of the three-way handshake. As a result, the server waits to complete the process for all those packets, which makes the server unable to process legitimate requests. So that's what a SYN ping of death is, if you think about it, is in this particular case is it sends more data, the size, 65,535 bytes. And anything, so today, if you send anything larger than those, the network interface, or there are so many things in place right now to drop those packets. But if these packets were not dropped, you would get large number of these packets, and the server tries to process it. And that's another type of attack. I'm sorry, I'm not going too detail into it, but you just need to know what ping of death attack is. It's to do with the size of the packet. All right. Don't have to remember the 65,535 bytes, but just understand what it is. Land attack, again, this is something really old. Again, doesn't happen anymore, but local area network denial attack is a DOS attack that consists of sending a special poison spoofed packet to a computer. Again, there's not much information online about these. I wouldn't really worry about this, but just know that there is an attack called a LAND attack, which is local area network denial attack. And you may be able to search online and find more information about it. So these are some of the references that I thought would be really useful for you guys. So I put that in there. The last three references are from the previous session, but the ones that I kind of used for this, and plus I feel if you go through these different references, I think will be sufficient for your CISSP cloud threats and vulnerabilities, and to be able to answer all the questions. I'm sorry I didn't have enough time to put together some of the typical questions that we see in this area. But again, there is plenty out there, and maybe I can help you out if you find one and have questions about it. Maybe we can go through it and discuss it and come up with the right answer. So I thank you, everybody, for giving your hour and a half to this. I hope you found this somewhat useful. And if you need more clarification on any of these, please reach out back to me. And if none of these links are working, or if there is any problem, just let me know and I'll update it. Again, I'm going to make sure I proofread it, and I don't want to spell security in as a CISSP, but I'm sorry about that. But again, sorry, there's not much left in this session. Feel free to jump in and ask any questions.